Hey, what's up, everyone? Real quick, before we get rolling, do you have a coach on your holiday shopping list? Well, if so, you've come to the right place because the Coaches site is now offering gift cards. Head on over to thecoachesite.com/gifts to shop for an annual subscription to the Coaches site along with our premium courses. A gift from the Coaches site ensures that coaches get access to the top thought leaders in hockey and that they are providing a fun and dynamic learning environment for their players. Head over to thecoachesite.com/gifts to find the perfect gift for that special coach in yours or your child's life. And now, on to the show. I thought we could start here. So I was listening to I believe a preseason interview that you did, and you referenced that with Acadia Bathurst moving to St. John's, Newfoundland, that, despite your tenure in Charlottetown, you'd never been to Newfoundland. True?
That's correct.
So I started thinking about that. I'm like, you know what? Like, I've never been to the Maritimes, and I feel like a bad Canadian for saying that.
Yeah.
It's just never worked out. So I started going down a bit of a rabbit hole, and I was looking up. I'm like, I wonder what Charlottetown's like. How big of a town is it? And I learned quickly. I didn't even appreciate the geography, and that it's it's an island, and Charlottetown, despite it being, I think, about 50,000 people, it's the biggest center in the province. So my question would be, let's say myself or somebody, a friend of yours from Ontario, was coming to visit for the first time. Like, what are the must do's when you come to Charlottetown or PEI?
Well, it's one of the most unique places in our country, and you get polar opposites. You think of west with the mountains, and here it's all about red sands, the beaches, and seafood. So if you're a lobster guy, if you're a mussel guy, if you're an oyster guy, anybody coming here, you have to. It's known as a culinary. It's a food island. There's a huge culinary institute here. We get some of the best chefs in the country that come here. So as a foodie and as somebody that loves seafood, this is the place to be. And the second thing that jumps out is I think we probably have as many golf courses per capita as any area in the country, and there's some gorgeous settings and all kinds of different things.
When you're bringing players into your program, I could see, just based on what you just laid out, that Charlottetown for some kids and some families might seem like the optimal environment to not only develop as an aspiring hockey player, but just as a young man. However, for perhaps others, it might not be the right fit. How mindful are you when you're building your team of bringing in the right people that are going to appreciate perhaps the unique setting that Charlottetown offers them?
Well, I think in our recruiting, one of the things that we really pump is the setting that we have here. It's one of the best spots to be in the country. And not only that, but again, having been from Ontario, similar to yourself, I hadn't spent much time in the eastern part of Canada, but East Coast is just different. It's laid back. It's the people are incredible. For example, so one of the best features of our program is our housing. The billet families are fantastic. We have long-standing. I'm here 11 years, and we have people that have been with us for 15, 20 years prior to my tenure here that are still here. And, it's small. You can get around. It's easy to get around. It's not intimidating for a first-time traveler. The people are great. Our housing program is second to none. So those are the things that we really try to sell. And it is a big feature of our program. And we've had great success, whether it be kids from the U.S., Quebec, or the Maritimes. I think once they get here, they fall in love with it.
How important is that? I think that, it's, you're in a competitive league, and winning matters and success matters. But, maybe some of those things, when you talk about like the building, just being in a safe environment, probably being in a place where there's not, kids aren't battling traffic on their way to the rink. Like I know where we're at here and out on the West Coast, like the Vancouver Giants, for example, like, their kids used to have to battle rush hour traffic to get downtown to the Pacific Coliseum to go to games, like, which car full of teenagers. I mean, that maybe doesn't seem like the most, desired environment, but, just that overall environment that you have there for the kids to, not only feel like they're a part of a well-structured team, I guess, but also part of a well-structured community. How important is that into what happens on the ice?
Well, it's very important because I think the essence of junior hockey to me is still small towns. There's been a lot bigger towns now, Vancouver, the Quebec cities, the Halifaxes of the world. but it's built on small towns and being the big fish in the small pond. So for a lot of these kids, the sheer numbers tell us that the majority of them aren't going to go pro. So this is kind of the peak of the mountain for a lot of these kids. So to be able to experience it, coming into a small town where you're the one that's looked upon by all the minor hockey kids, you are the Connor McDavids of this community. This is the biggest thing. And a big part of our program is just that, is understanding for our players. It's a lot more than just hockey. It's about being a role model. It's about being involved in the community and getting these are attributes that it's going to serve these kids well as they move on in their life, whether it be hockey and other things, getting comfortable in different surroundings. And we have that aspect to be able to go tip to tip here in our province and integrate with kids into the classroom and reading programs. And they're, playing floor hockey with Special Olympics and involved in the community. And that's what junior hockey is so much more than just
awesome.
on the ice.
So, I'm curious about this. There's obviously been the change with the rules with players going to the NCAA. And I, from my perspective, I sense it's going to take a couple of years for it to balance out to see how that pathway takes shape. One of the advantages that I could see happening is that I felt like, coaches and managers in your position, because we were asking kids and families to make really big decisions at a really young age when they maybe didn't, everybody wants to play in the NHL. I think it's premature at 15 to 16 to say how close you may or may not be. And that, and again, I'm not painting everybody with the same brush, but I think at times the recruiting pitch from both sides was strictly focused on how we're going to make you an NHL player. And that was the focus. I think maybe one of the benefits now that there is a bit more flexibility is that it allows people in your position to say, hey, you know what? You might not be an NHL player, but here's the other benefits that you just laid out in terms of, as a young man, you're going to be a part of the community. You're going to be a role model. You're going to be reading to kids. And, we're going to make sure that whether you ever earn an NHL paycheck or not, that you're going to really grow as a person. And I think sometimes that aspect of junior hockey gets overlooked when, as you said, the data would suggest that should be the central focus of what junior hockey is all about.
Well, I'll give you an example. Many, many years ago, I had a fledgling junior career in the OHL, and I had a longtime coach, say to our team, the very worst thing that should happen to you if you're playing at this level right now is that you end up with a university degree without much student debt. And isn't that a blessing? Right? If that's the very worst thing that happens to you from playing junior. So for us with the new rule change, number one, I completely agree with you. I think it was an antiquated rule that made no sense for the vast majority of players. I think it's a wonderful opportunity now. The doors are opening. For our recruiting, we've just kind of switched gears because what we've done the last probably 5 to 7 years is we tried to sell a partnership of the CHL and CIS hockey. Because the guys that aren't going pro, they would graduate. So we would try to sell, 8 to 9 years of elite level hockey. You'd play 4 or 5 years here at junior and you graduate. You can probably have your pick of any Canadian university program in the country if you've played at our level. You certainly have a lot of different opportunities. So there's 4 more years to go in. You walk out with a degree in your pocket with minimal debt, and you set yourself up for life. Now, we've just opened up a whole new landscape down in the U.S. It's still going to end up on an education. But if the worst thing that can happen is you play 4 or 5 years at the CHL level, and you go, whether it's NCAA or one of the great CIS programs, you've played almost a decade of elite level hockey, which is a privilege for a young man.
Yeah, I think that's a great, when you say the decade part like that really puts it in a perspective that this is like, a good chunk of somebody's life where they, kind of develop those key life skills, playing a boy's game. I was trying to go back and look. So again, we touched on, you've been in Charlottetown for 11 years, and I'm sure this isn't lost on you. I mean, you're a bit of a unicorn when it comes to junior hockey coaches or just coaches in general to be in one spot for that long. And, I've often thought like if I owned a team, any team, but I would view it like if I was running a business, let's say, I would want the manager to feel like they were in a position where they had a long runway, that when they made decisions, they were making decisions that were going to have the best possible impact on the people in the program 5 years down the road, not just, for that year or that season. You've had periods of your career where you've spent, you've kind of been 2 or 3 years with the program and moved on. You've had the benefit of hindsight now to see what it's like when you've been somewhere for a long time. How has your tenure in Charlottetown maybe changed the lens that you see some of the decisions and just how you deal with players on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think you take pride that with longevity comes the ability to build a program. And I think if we look around the country, they're really good programs. You think of like probably the gold standard, not probably, the gold standard is the London Knights. Well,
Yeah,
there's been continuity of ownership, management, coaching right down the top. So they can build their program. I think of when I was cutting my teeth in the industry in the Ontario Hockey League, it was Brian Kilrea and the Ottawa 67s. If you
great
thought
point.
of the
Yeah,
Ottawa 67s, you thought of Killer. It was a staple. And so his program was developed and run. And if you look around the country here in our league, Cam Russell's been a mainstay with the Halifax Mooseheads. And throughout, he's at close to 20 years of a tenure. And I think that's what everybody's striving for. Yet we live in such a panicky, what have we done for me lately world, in particular in sports. It's crazy. And I don't think, I think one of the good things about opening our eyes to the NCAA is the one thing the NCAA always held over us, and rightfully so, was the continuity of their programs, the longevity of their programs. If you think of the programs down there, yet there was always a term in the CHL called survival coaching. And it was easy for people to preach that. But when you're a young coach, you are literally coaching to survive because a losing streak, missing playoffs, that can cost you your job. And that's not a fun thing. I've been on that side
yeah,
of the coin. I know what it's all about. And I think sometimes you have to be able to, we want our players to learn from our mistakes. Well, so do young coaches. They have to learn from their mistakes, but they have to have runway in order to do that. And I think you become better as a coach, you become better as a manager. And I think if I'm a parent, I would like to put my son somewhere where I know there's stability.
a million percent. And you touch on the making mistakes part, that it's it's part of the development process for players, and as you said, it's a part of the process for coaches as well. But I mean, do you sense that, you talk about the survival coaching, and I think that's a great term, and we certainly see it, and I don't think it's ever a fault of, say, uh, coaches. I think it's the environment that we've created around them, and human nature takes over. And if you're paying your mortgage from winning hockey games, then you make decisions that are going to help you win that next game. But do you sense that, just that in the environment that you're in now, that when players make mistakes, that you perhaps are a better mentor to help them guide and get on the other side of those and learn from those opportunities, versus saying, hey, go sit in the middle of the bench because I'm not going to risk you making another mistake that might in turn cost the team, and in turn maybe cost me my job.
Yeah, definitely. I think with experience, with age, with experience comes wisdom. And with wisdom comes the idea that, particularly in junior hockey, it's different than the NHL. We hear all the stats about if you're out of the playoffs, as we're talking about now on the eve of American Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah.
It's all this hype and pressure. And I remember Pete DeBoer saying the one difference that he noticed from junior to pro was the immense pressure right out of the gate from game one at the NHL. Like, you got to start winning. You can't go on. You drop 4 in a row in the NHL, you might miss the playoffs. It's that, to that magnitude.
Yeah.
Whereas in junior hockey, you have to have a bit of a more of a broad scope picture. You can have an underachieving first half and improve and get in the playoffs in the second half. That doesn't happen at the pro level. So here, I think early in your career, you think, okay, you take that pro mindset into junior, and all of a sudden you're playing 2.5 lines. You're only playing your older guys. We hear all about this, the lack of development for your younger players. But I think as you get older, you realize, you know what? I can afford to drop a game in October if it makes me a better team in February. But you have to earn that right, and you have to have security in order to do that. But I think that's where you become a little bit more patient with mistakes. You're still calling them out. You still have accountability. You still teach. But it's the ability to, hey, not scold them, but correct it, get back out there and go again. Encourage them to make another mistake. Try to master that one, make a second mistake, as opposed to just wham, immediately shortening the bench or scratching a guy and then you lose them. And listen, none of us are perfect. I've been in the business a long time. I learn every day. I'm learning every game. I think we're trying to keep up with how kids learn. But I do think, further to your point, with stability and longevity comes more patience.
I was reading that the ownership structure in Charlottetown is that there's 18 owners, correct?
Correct.
All from the community, and that I believe it was around 2011. These 18 folks pooled together. I think it was like just over $3 million purchased the team. So obviously a unique ownership environment. I imagine it's kind of like reporting to a board of directors in a
Yep.
sense. I've got to do that, and it's a skill in itself. And when I talk with NHL coaches, and I'll often ask them, like, what's the one thing, if you could go back and tell yourself when you first broke into the NHL, what's the skill that you wish you had it, you wish you had that you didn't, or that nobody taught you. And it's almost universal. It's how to manage up, and just, how tough that is. And I'd be curious that, you're not managing one owner, you're managing 18. Clearly it's working out, but what have you maybe learned from this experience that you could lend to other coaches listening that are going through this process for the first time?
Well, first off, it's a great point that you bring up, and I've lost at least 2 jobs on the inability to manage up as a young coach, not understanding, just as you're saying. I had no
Yeah.
clue of the
Yeah.
importance of it, and I didn't understand anything about it. Now I think it's about, I believe that my job, and again, I'm fortunate where I wear both hats here. I'm the coach and the general manager. Sometimes when you're just coach, you have to make sure that the manager's message to the ownership is the same as your message to the manager. And that's where a lot of
Yeah.
things falls apart. Everyone starts off saying we're all in this together, but when you hit rough waters, you
Yeah.
have to make sure that everybody's in the same room. One thing I would encourage is open dialogue in face to face in the same room with owner, manager, coach, so that there's no gray area. There's a lot of gray
That's a
area
great point.
that can
Yeah.
be
Great
misinterpreted.
advice.
It's like sending a text where you can't read the context of it. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. And okay, I tell the GM something, so he might say it in a different way to the owner, and it gets perceived completely differently. But in the good organizations, I think everybody's on that same page with communication. And then for me, it's all about painting pictures. What I mean by that is be able to say, here's what I look at here with my role as a manager is to have big picture. And in big picture as a manager is a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan. I mean, big picture for a coach is next weekend. I mean, we live in a day-to-day world as a coach. So it's like, here's where we are right now. But as a manager, like for instance, we're heading into a Christmas trade period here in the Quebec League. So I'll go to, we have our 18 broke down into, I have a hockey committee of 3 that I answer to on direct hockey matters. So we'll meet and I will literally put up scenarios. Here's a scenario where we're active buying the trade market. Here's where we're going to stand pat. Here's one that we could sell. Here's all different ones. And it's ultimately it's their team. They're the ones that are paying the bills. But it's a year, okay, we're middle of the pack team with some additions. We could probably bump up, get home ice in the playoffs, which could end up meaning, obviously, we know how important home ice is. Or it could be a situation where I'm not sure we're quite there this year. Like last year, we sold off. A couple years prior to that, we had a real ambitious buy. That's not my decision solely to make. Yes, I can advise on what I think the hockey product is, but I have to be able to say, hey, I understand it's a business as well. So it's almost like being a businessman. I build different business cases for them. Here's if we buy, here's what it's going to cost us, and here's the impact this year, next year, 3 years in terms of our draft slotting, our ages, our depth charts. And then we try to scope that out. Here's if we sell, here's if we stand pat. So in that engineers and sparks a discussion on a number of different topics. And at the end of the day, we walk out with a consensus.
Do you think that's, maybe what you described, like part of the art of that? And I mean, you talk about coaches just, maybe focusing on the 6 inches that are in front of their face. But I mean, we've all been there. Like it's the trade deadline. And of course you're like, it's easy for a coach to say, you know what, let's put all our chips in the middle of the table and go get this power play quarterback or a player that we're just convinced is going to put us over the edge. And, but in terms from a management perspective and managing up, what you described as saying, hey, like, because what I heard was like, it's the 3 options to say, hey, I'm giving you my opinion on 3 different scenarios. And you're probably biased towards one, I would think.
Absolutely.
But to say, hey, but I've still thought through every scenario and I'm going to give those all to you versus saying, I'm going to come to you saying like, we have to do it this way, AKA my way.
Well, right. It's like any organization, whether it's hockey or business, there has to be a top-down philosophy, a guiding philosophy for the organization. And I think that's the one challenge here with 18 owners. It's hard to get a consensus with 18, right? So do you want to use the old Boston Bruin model where you get in the playoffs every year and you maybe earn a profit, but you don't win a cup? They went that for a long time. I believe they had the record for most consecutive playoff appearances, but didn't really push. They didn't win their cups in that time. Or do you want to do the different model? In particular in junior, and we're seeing it in all 3 leagues now. I think it was started here, but they're really, really ambitious. Load up and you rise to the top, and then you sink to the bottom, and you start over again. It's cyclical in nature. Well, it depends. If I'm in a small market, I'm in a small market here. Can our fan base sustain a bottom out, missing the playoffs? Are we going to drop below 1,000 people a night, and all of a sudden my owner's bleeding red ink? So this is decisions that have to be made collectively together, because it's not just a hockey decision. It's not just a business decision. There has to be a marriage of the two. And I think organizationally, that's my challenge to the owners, excuse me, is what philosophy do you want? Because I've had different owners say, well, when's it going to be our year? And other guys, some are more cautious, no different than business. Some are risk averse. Some love putting all the
Yeah.
chips on the table. So I think those are the discussions that have to happen. And I think from a manager standpoint, when it's a separate roles, is no matter which way we go, we have to support our coach. The one thing that bothers me is when teams go through rebuilds. Rebuilds are never easy. They're never linear. They're never as smooth as we think. And we see it at every level where we're going to go under an ambitious rebuild, and then the poor guy that's stuck behind the bench gets gassed before he has a chance to see it through because frustration sets in because in year 2 of the program, you think we should be further ahead than we are. Yet it's an inch by inch process to get there that we made a decision 2 years ago to rebuild, but we have to have the patience to see through it.
Like 100%. And again, I see it, listen, Jim, probably like you have conversation with friends in the industry and the person on the other end is a great coach and a great leader. And I'm just like, how could they possibly make good decisions when they know that, on one hand, they're being told, think long term, like everybody's acknowledged it's going to be rough. But then when it's rough, it's like, well, I guess we should point the finger at somebody, and we all know who that finger gets pointed at. Yeah. I looked at your situation in Charlottetown, and it made me reflect on a conversation we had on the show years ago with Cam Abbott. So Cam's now the head coach of the Chicago Wolves in the American League. And for a long time, him and his twin brother, Chris, ran Rogel in the Swedish League. And when they were inserted there, the team was like on the brink of relegation. And Rogel, the size of the town is relatively the same size of Charlottetown. And they talked about how, they had young kids, and what they didn't understand when they took the job was that the difference between being in the top league in Sweden and the second tier league was about 40 jobs. And they said 40 jobs in a community, the size of 50,000 people, that gets felt. That means that somebody your kids go to school with is likely going to be affected in some way.
Yeah.
And, they talked about how when they were out in the community that, inherently that kind of, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it kind of it brought on a new mission because it was bigger than just the team. It was about the community. And I can imagine that, with what you've described, that, the impact of the Charlottetown Islanders, not just in the community of Charlottetown, but across the entire province of PEI, like it means something. When you win, it matters. When you lose, it matters. And as you said, if you can't get enough people in the barn to come cheer on a product worth getting behind, that gets felt as well. And how does that, as you're building your program, how mindful do you need to be of that, of just sort of the overarching impact of your program?
Well, I think you have to understand when you come into these situations, as hockey guys, we tend to look just hockey. So we're as equally guilty. We don't look at it through the owner's eyes. And I think when you sit down with the ownership in good situations, I'm really fortunate I have a good situation here. Well, they'll share all the information with me. Okay, we lost X amount of money. Like, it's easy to say, okay, we need to rebuild. And it's like a player. It's the old adage with players and coaches. Coach wants you to play better, to play more. Player says, well, if I play more, I'll play better. It's the same thing here. As hockey guys, we always want more money. You always want better facilities. You want more money for recruiting, more money for this, right? Because you think it's a cure-all. And then the owner's like, well, yeah, but here's the reality. I lost whatever, 80,000, 100,000. These aren't small figures. So say the same thing. Okay, well, if you get the program up and our revenues increase, then we can easily give back to the program. So there's always that push and pull. But I think the stepping back and putting the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and in this case, in the owner's shoes, and realize, okay, this is a really important aspect here, and in particular in these small towns, because we're largely an attendance-driven league. We're not big enough to have a lot of corporate advertising. We're a town of $40,000, $50,000, so we're extremely limited. We can't just go out and start pulling in new revenue streams left, right, and center from different sources. It just doesn't exist. We're lucky with the group that we have. So our job is to put a product on the ice that makes these people proud, and they want to come out and support us. And I'm really fortunate here that it's an educated hockey community, in the fact that all they want is that they want a tough, gritty team that works hard on a nightly basis. They can live with wins and losses. They're not a team they're not a fickle group. I'll give them that. It's pretty the air. So a lot of ours is trying to build an identity that's going to represent the people of PI.
Great segue. And, you look at this time of year, you guys are, roughly a third of the way through your season. I think it's I think it's universal at all levels, but particularly in junior hockey, December's a tough month to coach in, because you've got probably a lot of young players that are really looking forward to going back home during the Christmas break. The weather changes, it's dark. I think there's a bit of a malaise that comes over, your day-to-day routine. At least that's been my experience, and certainly conversations I've had. I'd be curious, do you have any suggestions or or hacks, I guess, for this time of year to kind of keep your group focused, or what might you focus on that maybe help keeps your team on the right path?
Well, I'm hoping we sped the calendar up. We've had a horrible November, so I'm hoping our malaise was November. We were
Okay.
we were red hot in October. We've been ice cold in November. So I joke with guys, a couple of GMs and leagues. I'm not sure if we're the October team, the November team, or somewhere in between. But yeah, your point is valid, and I think the one thing that we've learned with a couple of our groups over here is we have to make sure that we kind of gauge our energy on a daily basis, and we'll do some stuff that might on the surface seem silly, but if we kind of read we usually have a little 5-minute video meeting at the start of every practice, kind of a theme that we want to go over in the day. And as coaches, there's 3 of us. And if we kind of sense the energy levels down, we'll jump into, like last week, for example, we played dodgeball as a warm up. Throw the sticks out. We had
Like
2
on the
soccer
ice?
balls. Yeah. On ice dodgeball, one team on one blue line, one team on the other, and just kind of made up some simple rules. But it just jacked the energy up. So instead of like just doing laps and handling the puck, we just did something different. And ironically, I got the idea from a minor hockey coach a couple years ago,
No way.
we were talking about the energy level in practices, and he was coaching little kids, and he said his was the opposite. His was the attention span was so short that he said, "Screw it, I just went to mini game right off the hop," and they got their energy out of the way, and then they settled down and we could practice. So we were having a coffee, and I said that might work in the reverse for us, because sometimes a junior, especially this time of year, you need
Yeah.
to pounce the energy up. The energy is low, as you alluded to, the darkness, just the grind. You're in the middle of the
Yeah.
grind. We'll play 3-puck scrimmage, or we might play a reverse hand scrimmage, something off the hop to try to spark the energy up, just to kind of take the focus off, because it becomes routine and bordering on mundane when you practice this much. So you have to try to have some form of variety. So we try to start a lot of days that way. And then one of our things is good, bad, or indifferent, no matter how things are going. We end up with a competition game at the end of every practice. And that ends up being fun. But this generation, probably every generation, they'll work harder in that than they do in some of your drills. We'll just put a little bit on the line. Hey, the loser does a mountain. It's kind of just a standing guess. And then we'll let our defensemen, they get to pick one line that joins them.
No, well, that's great.
We split up into 2 teams, and it might be 3-and-3 cross ice. It might be some form of a different game.
Yeah.
It's always some sort of a compete game, and then there's a little bit of a carrot at the end of it.
I love that. And I just want to go back to a comment you made about, good, bad, or indifferent. You guys always finish on a compete day. And I just, when it comes to, I think at the end of the day, what we all want as coaches is we want consistency.
Yes.
And I think that, I would, I look back, and there was a period in our game where if you had a bad weekend, you could probably expect that you were going to have a practice without puck. So there was going to be sort of a punishment, or, you were going to feel it. You just knew it. And I mean, I don't want to date you, but you probably coached in an era where that, was a part of the playbook a
Guilty
little
as
bit.
charged.
Yeah. But just with what you said there, like that consistency to say, hey, like whether we win, lose, or draw, like we're always going to run things a certain day. We're going to finish on a high note. We know that players like this, and we're going to, I guess what I'm hearing there is that, perhaps, or maybe you've learned that there's a benefit to saying, hey, like, let's look forward, and, let's not design a practice that's based on what we did last weekend. Let's design a practice that's going to set us up for success the next weekend.
Well, we talked earlier about what you learn over the course of time, and you learn by making mistakes, just like our players do. And we make lots of them, and I'm still making them on a daily basis. But the one thing if we're asking our players to have a short memory and wipe the slate clean, then the least we can do as coaches is do that and start every day fresh. And we try, and it's not always easy. And are we perfect at it? No. Are we batting 1,000? Not a chance. But we try. All right. So the stereo should be on, because if you don't have energy and enthusiasm, your practice is not going to be very good. So no matter what happened on the weekend, we start fresh, because to me, we always use the different expression here. We have 64 dress rehearsals before the playoffs. And that's what each game is. Each game is a dress rehearsal, trying to figure it out, right? So even if we've lost, it's a great opportunity to learn. And I think once you take the emotion out of it, so if you lose on Friday or Saturday, take Sunday off. In junior, you used to take Sunday off, and then Monday, it's okay. It's forward focus. What do we have to do to win the next game coming up? What's done is done, right? We need to learn from it. We might have to, review some clips. It's not all going to be just forward ahead. We have to make some adjustments here, but by and large, what it made me think about, I read an article recently. It was a former NFL player that had got drafted originally into the Cleveland Browns in what he deemed as a really negative environment. And then he got traded to Seattle Seahawks with Pete Carroll. And he said the biggest difference for him there was that Pete Carroll had the same environment every day, no matter what happened, whether they're on a 5-game winning streak, 3-game losing streak. And it taught them that process, because all of us as coaches talk about process. We all kind of speak the same language. We repeatedly do over and over and over again. Yet we contradict it. We get all ticked off and we've lost, and now we're in a miserable mood. Well, that's sending them wrong. Now we're starting the teeter-totter of emotions for our players, and we're dealing with teenagers here. By nature, they're going to be up and down. So as the adults, we have to try to kind of maintain an even keel. The old expression, not too high, not too low, but we have to kind of make sure that on a daily basis, we're sticking to that as well.
Have you ever seen the video the Seahawks put out when Carroll was there about how he kind of designs practice?
Well, I've seen clips of it where they compete on everything. They'll pause their meeting to do a free throw competition and all this crazy stuff.
Well,
but I don't think I've seen the one you're referring to.
I'll flip it to you. I use it in a lot of presentations, but like the one thing, and I'm all in on this, is that he makes a comment, and I coach my son now, who's it's obviously different. He's 7, so different age bracket. Yep. But I think it applies, at least in my opinion, it applies to all players or all athletes. Is that he says we don't tell the players what we want them to do. We praise the behavior we want, and that's how we build the culture. And that's just really stuck with me. And to your point, he talks about it's like, part of that is we need to be consistent in how we show up in our own mindset. And that's all we focus on. It's just praising good behavior. We don't reprimand players. We believe that if they see that, players are getting a high five when they do it right, eventually we'll turn the tide and we'll get everybody on the right page. And I just thought that was, that's just something that's always stuck with me. So I'll flip that to you when we jump off here. You've had, you talk about that identity of the Charlottetown Islanders, and I was going back, and I mean, over your tenure there, you've had some ball players come through your dressing room. Is there any former player that you find yourself referencing a lot with your current team, or that you would point to say, hey, like that's how we want to do it?
Well, there's a number of them, and I think the biggest thing that the guys that have gone on to have success were the guys that were most willing to accept anything that was thrown at them. And by that, I mean like a guy like Sammy Blais, who unfortunately I think is just on waivers today with the Leafs. But, Sammy's won a Stanley Cup. Sammy came to us in a trade my first year from Victoriaville, and he'd been a really highly skilled kid his whole life. But he grew. He had a late growth spurt. Now all of a sudden he was a man. When we got him, he was also drafted he'd already been a St. Louis draft pick. But we kind of challenged him to take on more of a physical role, because he's now 6'1", 190 pounds. He progressed from a boy into a man, which is one of the neat parts of coaching junior hockey, is seeing that transition with growth spurt. But in order for him to play pro, he wasn't going to be able to be just strictly a skill guy. So we challenged him to be that. And he started to relish that opportunity. But he had to, if he doesn't have the openness to do that, he could have easily rebelled, because this is a guy who would have probably been a 70 to 80 point guy. He had to sacrifice. He probably became a point of game guy, but all of a sudden he became a real dog on the forecheck. All of a sudden, he starts to go through bodies. And lo and behold, the next year we think we're getting him back as an overage. He goes down to St. Louis in the summer, drops 10 pounds of baby fat, becomes a man. Berube was actually coaching in Chicago in the American League, loved him, and the rest is history. He still gets an opportunity now based on Craig being his coach in the Chicago Wolves. But I look at a guy like that saying, wow, he was a guy that was willing to transform his mindset. He was still a skilled guy. But instead of being just a perimeter skill guy, he all of a sudden wanted to be F1 on the forecheck. He wanted to get into dirty areas. Another kid that comes to mind is Xavier Simoneau, who is in the Laval in the American League. And Sim is one of the smallest players in the American League with the biggest engines and the biggest heart.
Yeah.
And we acquired him as an overage, and he had been a perennial 80 to 100 point guy, really, really high driving engine. But the first thing he asked us is, I want to kill penalties. And we're like, okay, no problem. But He said, yeah, because I know if I'm going to the American League next year, I'm not going to be on the power play. I won't be a front. I have to learn how to be
Interesting.
a better checker, and a better penalty killer. So he was already thinking, knowing full well that I can't be this role at the next level. So those are just two examples, but in everybody that's kind of progressed on, number one, there had to be a baseline talent. We know that. But it was a willingness and an acceptance of, hey, at the next level, I'm going to have a more well-rounded skill set than I have to in junior. I can get by with just this in junior, but if I don't broaden my base, I'm not going to have success at another level.
At your level, with that being said, like what would be the skills that you find yourself most having to um, build into your players' games? Not only to have success with your team, but setting them up for success later on in their career.
Well, simple as a skill is the term that's used a lot in coaching, but young players coming into our league don't understand that because, in particular, now this is an extremely highly skilled. You're probably seeing it with your son. I don't think the skill level in our game has ever been higher. Yet they've been hockey schooled to death. And
Yeah.
part of that, what I mean by that is their edge work, their shooting, their passing, their hard skills are phenomenal. They really are. But now we have to how to incorporate something as simple as an area pass or a chip play off a wall, which seems like all their life they've been told, tape to tape pass, and that's important to a point. But now all of a sudden you're saying, listen, sometimes the simplest play, putting it into an area and letting it skate onto it, the whole definition of playing fast is different at different levels. And so for us, we have to teach that. They've never heard this concept before. That's one thing I see with the puck, but a lot of our job is without the puck. Their skills are so good with the puck, and we like to give them the canvas to go be creative. We don't take the creativity out of them. We want a hard grinding team, but you still have to let them create. But for us, it's play away from puck and understanding. It's not hockey sense per se, but it's understanding the game at a certain level. There's situational thinking. It's we're up 2-1 with 5 minutes to go. My approach can't be the same as it would be if I'm down a goal. Right, I have to think through certain situations. For the first time in your life, I remember coaching with Dave Cameron. Dave going up and down the bench saying, "Okay, no more big hits right now. We're up a goal late. No more big hits. We don't need to. You miss your timing on a hit, you take a
Yeah. Yeah.
penalty." So that's guys are looking. I've never heard this before. Like well, yeah, but it's because of the situation. It's the time and score situational read. So that's a concept that a lot of kids coming up through minor hockey, and that's no fault of a minor hockey coach. They can at each level you start adding layers to players. Each coach adds a different layer. So part of ours as junior is teaching some of those concepts away from the puck and making them think through a different lens.
Well, you talk. It's a great example with Dave, and I can appreciate that. Some of that is taught through, say, video. Some of it's just repeating, being consistent on the bench. Based on the situation. But I think that's really. I think the word culture gets thrown around a lot. But in my opinion, like culture is when the players just know that we're not making big hits right now, or we know that we're not turning pucks over the blue line, or we know we need to really block shots, whatever the case may be. But you talk about that cyclical nature of junior hockey, and I think what that where it's sort of unique in junior hockey is you can sort of it's a better environment maybe to evaluate how long it takes to build a culture or for those things to stick. Do you have any insights on that to say, hey, like I need a group for this long until I can really get the buy-in, or maybe for them to understand how we want to play intuitively in the various situations that hockey throws at you.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to earlier. Like one of the great things, and we touched on it without touching on the actual subject, is when the longevity and the stability allows you to
Yeah.
build a culture because there's continuity, right? So all of a sudden now you have a core players. If you've got 6 or 7 guys returning, they already know what your standards are, so they're helping coach your players more than you are,
Yeah,
or as much as you
totally.
are, right? So all of a sudden they're the live example of how things are. Something as simple as dump the puck in on the bench side on a line change. Some kids have never heard this before. So now you're starting to make progress when you're hearing your players on the bench reacting to it. Hey, come on, we have to put that in bench side. You know that, okay? Or slash support on a break, or certain things that are kind of your non-negotiables. When you start to hear your core group coaching the players, that's when you start to have culture. When it's all silence and it's only the coaches coaching, that's when you've got some work to do. But for me, when I look out and I start to see players, you've got coaches. Sometimes even it's a bad period, and you're walking off, and in the captain says like, "Don't worry, Jim, I got this one." Okay,
Yeah,
we're moving in the right direction. Culture is building here. Those are the telltale signs for me.
love that. So you mentioned your junior career. You played for the Kitchener Rangers, Great Barn, the Odd.
Great barn.
You go to York University. What did you take at school?
Sociology, social life.
Interesting. Okay, but I mean, your career. I mean, you didn't hesitate. You jumped right into coaching. Like, when did you? Was there maybe a particular event or experience that sort of planted that seed, or did you just sort of wake up one day and figure out that that's what you wanted to make your life's work?
Well, the reality and the truth is, yeah, I took sociology because I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. I wanted to play 4 more years of hockey, if I'm being perfectly
Yeah,
honest.
sure.
And I'll never forget. Probably in February of my final year, I'm thinking like, oh damn, what am I going to do now? And I'll preface this by apologizing to every teacher out there because I don't mean it the way it sounds, but I thought, well, I'll just apply to teachers college. Anything can apply to teachers college. Well, little did I know that I hadn't taken enough teachable subjects. I took the easy route, quite frankly, to get the social degree. So I didn't have enough of the histories or Englishes even to get in. So I graduate and I'm like a kite waiting for the wind to blow. I don't know where to go. So I went home back to Kingston, and all of a sudden I'm selling life insurance, and I'm the worst salesman in the
That'll
world.
get you into coaching in a hurry.
Well, exactly. But my oldest brother had coached minor hockey, in fact, still does in Kingston for years. And he was all over me. And the expression he used is, it's time for you to give back now. You've taken a lot from the game. You've loved the game, but you need to give back now. And the way to do that is to coach. So he was trying to get me to
Yeah.
coach. At the time, he was coaching the major band and AAA team in Kingston. So I said, okay, well, I'll help out a little bit, but I can't go on the road because I'm an insurance salesman, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But 2 months in, I'm realizing like I love this. This is awesome. Now this is great. Now I can't wait for the practices and the games, and you got the coaching bug then. And I always tell everybody I didn't have a linear path. Mine is more like a river that just kind of hit a rock and bounced this way and went that way and up and down. But I just knew I wanted to coach. So I think you always have to plan B. I sold photocopiers that did all kinds of crazy different things, but I just kept chasing opportunities, and I was lucky. I was, my wife doesn't like when I say I was lucky, but I was still single. I didn't get married until I was in my 30s, and I had the ability then to pack up and go. So I could chase jobs and I could chase opportunities, and you learn at every stop along the way. I really got the bug early, a year or two in. You're like, this is great. Like, it doesn't feel like work, and that's probably the best sign of something you love.
100%. And so, I mean, I look at that early part of your career. So you go from, the Bantam AAA team, you're an assistant coach with the Kingston Voyageurs, the local junior A team. You go to St. Mike's in Toronto for 1 year. And then you go up to North Bay in the OHL. And I believe you're there for 1 year. And then the whole staff gets let go. This is what I find most fascinating about the coaching profession. Logic would indicate that, being, at that point, you're kind of in your mid 20s, you move up to North Bay for one season, you get let go. I'm assuming you weren't making a lot of money at that time, and you get let go. And for most people, that would be like, okay, like this isn't this isn't the horse I'm going to ride on for the rest of my life. But you didn't. You jumped right back on another horse. And did you recall just like your own sort of mindset at that time that maybe motivated you to say, no, I'm good. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, because honestly, it never even occurred to me not to coach again. Like the
You're
experience
just
in
in
North
at that
Bay.
point.
No, I get fired. I'm like, who cares? I'm 27 years old. Big deal. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a better coach now. I had the experience. I got really lucky in that my best friend was the coach and general manager of the junior B team in Kingston. And he'd got married a year or two before, and his wife was pregnant with their first child. So you talk about life taking you in different directions. So I never thought about not coaching, but all of a sudden, he's about to become a first-time father. He's coach and general manager. He's like, listen, I don't think I can do both. Will you coach? I happen to be out of a job. So I go back home to the team that I'd been with before and become the head coach. So that allowed me to jump right back into it. And it's comfortable. It's my best friend. I've known him since I was 4 years old. So that got me right back up on the horse, so to speak.
Got it. And then from there you go to the Mississauga Ice Dogs, who at that time are owned by Don Cherry. And so my first job in junior hockey was with the Quesnel Millionaires. And I was totally unqualified to coach, but for whatever reason I had a bit of a knack for scouting and specifically recruiting. And so I convinced this kid, Spencer Fowler, to come out and play for us in Quesnel. And Quesnel is like, I mean, I go on the internet, and we didn't have the internet back then, but if we had it, like I go on the internet, I look at Charlottetown, and I'm like, that looks like a great place to live or to send my child to play junior hockey. Quesnel had at the time like the worst barn ever. And, and we convinced this kid to come out. So we heard a lot of stories about the Mississauga Ice Dogs under Don Cherry. And I'm just curious, like, again, you're still behind the bench, but like, how did that, I guess maybe any stories from that experience, and maybe how did that experience, because I think that the assumption was when that team came to life that it was going to be a bit of a juggernaut, and it turned out it took a little while for the train to get momentum.
Yeah, you're being polite. You know what? You talk about, I was extremely, extremely underqualified for that job. So what happened is, after North Bay, I go back to Kingston. Well, as everyone in the world knows, Don's a Kingston guy. So Don's brother, Dick, was the head scout for Mississauga at the time. He lived in Kingston. Yeah, we had a really good junior B team. Jay McClement was on our team, and so he ended up going second overall the next summer at the OHL draft to Jason Spezza. So we were a pretty high profile team, and we were good. I think we were 19-6 or something at the time, and it was right around now. It was Grey Cup weekend, and you talk about. My mother still cringes to this day, even though it's worked out. I just got hired by a pharmaceutical company. I finally had a real job. So you talked about leaving North Bay. I did have to, because the junior B job was only part-time. So I finally got this pharmaceutical job, a pharma sales job, which was a great job at the time, real peach, company car, the whole bit. I'm literally in training in Toronto. I'm on my first day of training. And this is back before, you talked about before the internet. This was just as cell phones were just starting to come in. So I'm a starving student, basically, still this one. I don't have a cell phone. So I train all day with this lady in Toronto. She drops me off at a hotel in Don Mills. I go in. Remember the flashing light on the hotel phone? I pick it up, and it's my buddy from home, my general manager, my best friend. He's like, "Hey, Dick Cherry's trying to get a hold of you. They want the interview." And I figure he's pulling my leg. I'm like, yeah, sure. I hang up on him.
So like they wanted you for like the head coaching job in Mississauga?
Yeah, they had just fired Peter Sturgeon, the original coach of Mississauga. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me. He's like, no, I'm serious. So he gives me the number. So I phone and we get an interview for the next day, like at 4:00. So I have to still train. I have to go through another day of training. My head's totally in the clouds.
Yeah.
The lady drops me off at 3:30. I hop in my car. I bust across Toronto. And I go in an interview with Don Cherry. You have to remember, just to put it in context, I grew up in the Kingston area. I grew up idolizing Don Cherry. Don Cherry and the Boston Bruins.
Oh, I bet you every year at Christmas, guaranteed in my stocking, I had Rock'em Sock'em in there. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so it's even further. I grew up in a really small community called Wolf Island. It's an island. It's the biggest island of 1,000 islands, 1,200 people. So Don Cherry had a cottage there that my dad and my uncle built in 1979. So I'm 10 years old, and I got to go meet Don Cherry when he was coaching the Colorado Rockies when they coached against the Leafs at Maple Leaf Gardens. My dad, my uncle, my cousins, and a bunch of us drove up. So, I mean, I take this idolization to another level. I had the poster of Don Cherry up on my wall. So here I am. I'm 28 years old, wet behind the ears. No business being in this interview. It's only because I'm from Kingston, quite frankly. And there's Don dressed up in the full Hockey Night in Canada suit. I am shaking in my boots. I'm so intimidated. But we just go through an interview. He calls me the next night and offers me the job. So I'm too naive to even really kind of realize what I'm stepping into. I'm just like, without hesitation, again, going back to I'm single. I'm like, yep, done. Quit the pharmaceutical job, go coaching there. But there was so many different pressures. I think being naive kind of sheltered me from it. Number one, we weren't very good. We were really, really bad. We won a game in right around St. Paddy's Day in March. It was our fourth win of the year, and it kept us out of the record book, and we celebrated like we won the Stanley Cup. The record for fewest wins in the CHL was the London Knights won 3 one year. That's how bad it was. I mean, I got the job in the end of November. We tied our first game. This is how old I am. Back when ties still happened. We get outshot. Belleville Bulls outshot us something like 76-35. Our young goalie was just absolutely out of his mind. And we get a point.
No way.
And we don't get anything else until February. But it was just, there was so much hype around the team because of Don that it was just, I was not used to coaching an environment where there was so much outside noise. And it was, he was great. He really was. A lot of lessons learned over the course of time to look back on, but it was just the cast and crew of characters that survived that. I think just because of all the outside drama around it.
Do you remember, like, when you went through that interview process, like what they were, the questions they asked, or maybe what they were looking for?
Yeah, just at that time, obviously they hadn't had much success, and it was more just an open conversation. It wasn't like a real detailed coaching conversation, and I was young and naive and stupid and cocky enough to say at the end of the interview that if you don't hire me, you'll coach against me, which is totally brash and really not even within my character, to be honest with you. I don't even know why the hell I said it, but of course Don thought it was great. Loved it because the brashness and the boldness, and hey, in hindsight, they wanted a young guy that they could work with, So at 28, I mean, that was the first. We talked earlier about trying to learn to manage up. There was a lot of influences around the team, and again, when I look back on it, oh my God, was I underqualified to coach at that level at that time? Crazy.
So I'll ask you the question then. If you, like, in hindsight, like, if you could go back and give yourself any advice at that point in your career, what would it be?
Well, you know what? There's part of me that says, don't take the job, go be an assistant and learn.
Yeah.
But I don't get opportunity number two. I don't step into the Belleville Bulls head coaching job if I'm not the head coach in Mississauga.
Yeah.
Right? So everything works out for a reason. And, I think what I would have done, it goes back to your exact question. I would have learned how to manage up and communicate better. I didn't.
Yeah.
I bottled a lot of stuff up and didn't. I was intimidated by who I was working for. And I was intimidated by the fact that I was older and there was younger guys, like not just Don, but like Dick Cherry, as a former NHL player, illustrious career, an educator in Kingston. And I just sat and listened too much and didn't share and didn't talk. And it wasn't good. It ends up falling apart because then they're probably thinking, well, he doesn't even have an opinion, right? So I was too intimidated in the moment. I think you have to be ready when your moment presents. Yet I look back on it, wouldn't change anything.
So if we were to sort of look at your career, in chapters, so from there you go from Mississauga, you go on to be, right away to be the head coach in Belleville, and then you go to Kingston. What do you learn in those next 6 years that maybe help round you out as a coach? Could you start having some success?
Yeah, well, you go from an expansion team in Mississauga with a great group of kids, but nobody that ever won anything. Because let's be honest, if you're exposed to an expansion draft in junior, you're probably the bottom end. You're probably a character kid who works hard with limited talent, right? So we had that. We had a great group of kids. There's some men I still keep in contact with that are admirable men, but we just weren't a very good hockey team. And none of us had ever won at this level. So fast forward to that, then I get the opportunity, you're talking about getting kicked off the horse and getting right back on. But we go to Belleville, which is the complete polar opposite. So I get hired there 2 years after they won an OHL championship. So we talked early in the interview about culture and how it passes on from team to team. Well, I learned more from my first Belleville Bulls team, from the players, than I had in any coaching clinic or anything, because Louis Crawford had coached prior to me going in there. They'd won a championship in 99, and they had certain habits and details ingrained into them. And number one was the expectation to win. They expected to win. The internal expectations were extremely high, and they demanded excellence of themselves, and they hold each other accountable. And I kind of just stood back and took a lot of it in, right? So we learned how to work together. So that was my first experience of understanding just how important building the right culture is.
I'm just looking at your roster right now. I mean, you had some good play, like Matt Stajan on that team, Kyle Wellwood,
Bronco
Campbell, Matt, yeah.
Yeah, my first year, my first line, a guy that's not even mentioned, Randy Rose, scored 64 goals. Guy never played anywhere else. He had 64 goals. He was unbelievable. Wellwood led the league in scoring. I think Radivojevic came back from pro, ended up third. So we had almost the perfect power play. Wellwood was a little right shot dynamo on the goal line. Radivojevic was right shot off the flank. Randy was a big body left shot front of the net. And we had David Kornacki and Mike Jacobson back. It's crazy how you remember all these things after all these years, but these guys were like clockwork orange just watching them go. Yet in the end, we probably got out-coached in the playoffs. I lost to the Ottawa 67s, and I look back and kick myself. Lessons learned, because I think we had a better team. But you live and learn. It was a terrific experience there, because all 3 years, and then each year you could start to see that culture piece that we talked about. So Stajan's a rookie there, and then he carries it through. And by the time he's 19, we had Matt Stajan, Cody McCormick, and Adam Paymont, and then a bunch of really hard workers. We had one line and a bunch of really hard workers. Yet Stajan and those guys set the whole parameters for, and a guy like Cody McCormick, who started as a rookie, became the captain, and they carried that winning. There was a legacy from that team that won the championship in 99 all the way through my years there.
I'm curious. You mentioned Brian Kilrea, and I think one of the thesis that I've long had with the coaches site, because I've had so many people that are like, why would coaches want to share information with anybody else? I'm like, you don't understand. Coaches are there, like, they will. And they're like, but they're competing against each other. I'm like, I know, you don't get it. Like the higher levels, they're always talking. But, with that in mind, like Brian Kilrea, like, especially, at that time, you being a young coach, like, was there any dialogue? Was he somebody that you could go to and pick his brain a little bit?
Well, he was awesome. First off, he and Grapes are best friends.
Yeah.
So the very first day, and I think I still have it somewhere in a file. Again, I'm dating myself, and you can appreciate this, but I get a fax. There was no email back then. I get this fax come in, an Ottawa 67 letterhead, and it was like, "Dear Jim, good luck, have fun, Killer."
Come
And I thought it
on.
was the greatest thing ever.
So
Yeah,
you still have that?
yeah, I still have it somewhere in a file. I kept it
That's
because it was
awesome.
awesome. Because I had played in the league, I wasn't a very good player, but Killer was coaching then. I mean, he was a Hall of Famer at this point as well. So then, just getting to know him. So whenever you went into Ottawa, you talk about sharing. It didn't matter if Killer knew you or not. He would come to you before the game, and back then it was a different era. He said, "If you're so inclined, you want to have a beer after the game." So he would have a whole dressing room, and there's a reason Brian Kilrea never left Ottawa. He had the best life ever. He had his best friends all around him, and you go in the dressing room after the game, and they all smoked these big stogies, and the whole room was like a blue haze of smoke. And they had the old, remember the old 7-Up coolers that looked like a big pop can full of Molson X. There'd be one full of Molson X for Killer and his buddies, and another one full of Canadian. Because if you reach for an X, they'd be like, no, that's Killer's cooler. You grab yourself a Canadian. But you sit there and you just took it all in. And you could ask him questions, but more or less you just listened. And I always remember I had a young assistant coach who was really keen and eager. He was leaned right into Killer. He was one of his guard, and he's like, "Killer, character is really, really important, right? Yeah, you gotta have character." Killer's like, "Yep." Big haul off cigar. He says, "Exactly right, son." He says, "I'll tell you what." He says, "You give me all your talent, and I'll give you all my character." The guy's like, "Yeah." He goes, "And I'll beat you every day." He says, "Character's important, but you gotta have talent." So
Yeah. No kidding.
it
Wow.
was messages like that. Like, don't get,
Yeah.
if you read through his message, don't get too wrapped up in character without a combination of character and skill.
Sure.
You need skill guys with character to win, not the other way around.
That's awesome. You go to back home to Kingston, and then you have a year. I think it was 1 year with the Royal Military College in the CIS at the time. I've coached at that level, and my interpretation of it is, you get to coach some great humans at that level, but it's a really different dynamic because you get the carrot taken away from you. Like, you can't say, "Oh, well, you might do this because you're going to get drafted, or do this because your next contract you're going to be." I'm like, it is the purest form of coaching where you have to, like, if you can't build relationships, you're in tough.
Absolutely, and it's one of the turning points in my career. And I
Really?
didn't know it. I didn't know it at the time. So I went back. So Kingston being hometown, it was a dream come true to come home and coach the junior team.
Yeah.
I didn't do a very good job. I felt too much, and it was only me. It wasn't anybody else, but I felt all the external pressures. I felt like there'd been a history of mediocrity with the organization, and I think I wore it all too much, thinking I could be the guy. I wanted so bad to be the guy that helped move it to another level that I just didn't do a good job, and it just wasn't a good. What should have been a perfect fit, hometown and all that. You live and you learn, and it's like it just wasn't. I left what was a great situation in Belleville. I don't regret it because I got a chance to go back home and spend even more time with family. And both my children were born in Kingston, and that's why when it ended, I had an opportunity to get back into the OHL. But my wife was pregnant at the time, and you talk about life taking in different directions, and it just wasn't a good fit to move. It just wasn't the time to move. So if you'd ever told me at any point in the time that I was going to coach the Royal Military College, I'd have probably laughed at you. But all of a sudden I went in there, and exactly what you're saying, I had played CIS. And the only reason I coached is because I had a wonderful experience for 4 years at York University and played for a gentleman by the name of Graham Wise, who opened my eyes what real coaching was all about. So without my CIS experience, I would have lost the love of the game. Yet I was reluctant to go coach there. But for the first time ever, I coached men. And as you said, your methodology can't be the same. The carrot's not there. So and also for me, it's not just was I coaching university. I was coaching at a military college just as Afghanistan was starting to become a reality. So we're not talking about we're talking about kids that could be a phone call away from going to war. And I was extremely intrigued by the mindset of what would bring a young athlete into that setting. And it was all kinds of different
No kidding.
motivations, but it really forced me to step back. The first half of the year, I was pedal to the metal and still trying to coach the way it was in junior. I'm like, man, this isn't working very good. So stepping back and starting, but I learned more from them. Like all of a sudden they're coming in a bad practice. What's wrong, guys? Well, we were up at 6 a.m. for a 2 mile march in a downpour. You're like, oh yeah, you're training to be in the military. It's not just about hockey here. So I really let off the gas pedal in the second half and really started to enjoy the relationships and the experiences. And again, it's weird when you look back on it. I probably have had more contact over the years from that one team, that group of men, than I have in a lot of different junior teams, just because their maturity level is so high, and they understood it. They appreciated the fact that we coached them like real hockey players. I had different guys say that you're not just you're not coaching down, you're coaching up. That's great, but I learned more from them about how to manage relationships, how to forge relationships, how to have conversations, outside of the game. That's really held me in good stead ever since.
Is there maybe a lesson there in that, you know, it, it, you know, listen, I mean, like you, me, anybody that's listening to this right now, I mean, you probably live in a world where you get blinders on, right? Like every action and reaction, you just direct it at what's going on in the ice. But, you know, to your point, the story about, the players are getting up early to go on a march, is there just a broader lesson there that says, hey, maybe when things aren't going wrong, instead of assigning blame, that we just need to ask a question and ask, find out what's really going on first before we pass judgment.
Oh God, yeah, and that's when I said my methodology now. When I look back on, like, so my whole time in the OHL, I feel like calling all the guys and apologizing that I had there, because it was just
Yeah.
it was a naiveness to understanding. I think sometimes when you're a young coach, we all fight the battle of self confidence, but you're
Yeah.
afraid to show it. No different than a young player coming in, but as a young coach, you don't want to show weakness, especially back in that generation, that era.
Totally.
You didn't want to show it. So what do? You become probably too much of a hard ass, and you rely too much on X's and O's, and then you forget that you're not coaching hockey; we're coaching people. That's it's the old adage: they'll do whatever they want as soon as they know that you care. But now it's like the pendulum has swung so much. But you tried to make your mark as X's and O's and disciplinary and all that, and now it's like, let's shut the computer off and go figure out what's going on. Now we meet every 5 games, or we try to. It's hard with a challenging schedule, but we ask questions, and most of it's not hockey. How's your billet? How's school? How's everything at home? Anything bothering you? What's going on? And it's incredible what we've gotten out of those meetings, and we've been able to correct problems or issues, or at least identify them before they become a problematic. And I'd have never done that years ago. It just didn't think about it. And veteran coaches even back in that era were, but the young guys, and it goes back to, I think that's the important part of platforms like this and sharing. I think we have to be open enough as older coaches that have lived through the experiences, like, hey guys, here's the mistakes I made. Right? I'm an open book, man. I've got, as I said earlier, I lost jobs because I didn't know how to manage up, but I also lost jobs because I was a jackass and didn't handle personal relationships the right way. So, you live and learn, and young coaches, if you can learn the lesson, the quicker you can learn it, the better off you are.
Jim, I'll tell you what, I have so much of an appreciation for just how candid you're being. And we've had a lot of these conversations on the show. And, I think what you're sort of describing is, have you read Rick Westhead's new book?
I haven't yet. I haven't had the opportunity to. I'd like to.
Okay. Everybody should read it.
Yeah.
And so I read it, and it was tough. And there's times I had to put it down, and I was, you kind of like in your own mind, you're looking in the mirror and you're like, shit, like, I got some blood in my hands, or there's some things that I said or did that I'm not proud of. And I think, my takeaway from the book, cause he talks about, like, at some point we gotta move forward, which I think is healthy. And, what I saw as part of the challenge in hockey's culture is that we live in this world where it's like, for that to happen, people need to do exactly what you're doing now. They need to be able to tell their story. They need to be able to admit that maybe a way that they did things wasn't the best way, and they've learned a new way, and shift the focus on that. But unfortunately, I'm like, the downside of the book is people are going to read this and everybody's going to be scared shitless to speak up and tell the truth. And that's not gonna help the game either. And so I say that to say thank you, because I think it's really important for more experienced coaches just to tell their stories and speak from experience that, hey, I've done it. I've taken option A, and I've taken option B, and option B is way better.
Yeah.
And
I think tied in with that is, like, one of the things with cancel culture is it's been great because it's identified a lot of major issues, but it's also
For
created
sure.
paranoia on the flip side, right?
Yeah,
So I think both sides have to be able to learn from mistakes, and you're still going to make mistakes. So we're never going to cure the fact that teenagers might make bad decisions. For time immemorial, they've been making them. We're hoping to educate them. It's ongoing, continuous education. When I look back now, the education that these guys get on social issues is so far beyond what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. That's the only thing that bothers me is that let's at least admit that we're trying to move in the right direction. Do we have a long way to go? We all do. Hey, I'm 56 years old. We're trying to I'm an avid reader. I'm trying to challenge myself. Like, how do these kids learn? As you said, we all have blood on our hands. Anyone who's coached this long and isn't is lying, quite frankly, right?
yeah.
So we all have to. It takes courage to say, you know what, I got to change my way. It's not easy. I can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, you can. You talked about a guy like Brian Kilrea. He had success in like seemed like six different
Wild.
decades.
Yeah.
At least 4 different decades. Well, that means he evolved. Because kids weren't the same in 1980 as they were when he started in 1970, and they sure as hell weren't the same in the 2000s than they were when he first started. Yet he had to have changed because he kept having success. So I think that was the one big takeaway from that. Even the old school, everybody calls them old school, but you still have to learn and you have to change your ways.
Well, yeah. You know what every coach has always said? Players today are different.
Yeah,
Every coach has always said that.
right. From 1920 on.
Yeah, 100%. Military college. I'm assuming after that season, the phone rings and it's Pete DeBoer.
No, actually, it was Dave Cameron.
No way. Okay, interesting.
I went from RMC and then I took a step back. Actually, well, I say a step back. As you talked about, I loved the relationship with the men. I missed the carrot in the game competition, the CIS. I missed the 60 game schedule and all that. So Dave called, and I'd coached against Dave, and I coached his son, and he was transitioning back from the American League, where he was in Binghamton, back to take over. The St. Mike's was moving to Mississauga, become the Mississauga St. Mike's Majors at that time. And he asked if I would go in as associate coach and assistant GM, and I jumped at it because it was a chance to take a step back after I had some success as a head coach, but then I'd stubbed my toe in Kingston, and then I went to RMC, and I thought, what better person to learn under? And it was also a chance to add a little bit of the managerial portfolio. So I spent a year with Dave, and then the opportunity in Florida opened up. But the year with Dave was really, really valuable. It ended up being, ironically, myself and James Boyd were the assistants with Dave, and it was one of the best hothouse coaching idea sharing for an entire season that I've ever had.
No kidding. And so, like, I'm just looking. So at that point, he's been to pro hockey. He's come back, and I imagine like the process that you're going through of like going up and then taking a step back. He's going through there. Like, what would have been some of the key? Like, what's still a part of your toolbox that you look back and say that came from that season in St. Mike's?
Well, Dave was really good at. I think we touched on it, but about the relationships, and I think me at RMC, but even when he coached pro, I think there's a little bit more of that. And Dave's also an educator; he was a guidance counselor by education and kind of his start of his career. So he took a lot of that in. So he had good insight into getting inside young men's heads, understanding where they were at, what they were thinking, and kind of that. So I kind of watched how he observed, and then. The other thing that all the great coaches do that I've worked with would be Dave or Pete or Brent Sutter is they create black and white situations. They eliminate gray areas. And any player I've ever had, and I carry that with me to this day, they want honesty. Even if it's bad, they'd rather know. They don't like mind games. They don't like gray area. It's like it's black or it's white because that's easier for us to understand. And all three of those guys, whether it be their systems, whether it be their messaging, whatever it was very clear, concise, and didn't leave a lot open for interpretation.
So then you get the call to go to Florida with Pete. And, and I think Pete obviously had a ton of success in the OHL at that point with Kitchener. You mentioned that when you first got the head coaching gig in Mississauga that you weren't ready. Did you feel you were ready at that point to go coach NHL players?
I thought I was.
Yeah.
I thought I wasn't. And again, probably he would admit the same thing. And we've talked about it before. It's such a big leap. You don't think it is at the time. I was more prepared for that move than I probably was going into Mississauga just because Mississauga was a head coach. But yeah, it goes back to, I think the RMC experience in a weird way helped me because my role in Florida was more or less good cop, which was kind of fun for me because I never really had that. I'd been head coach from young, and we talked about kind of the insecurities of head coaching. You become too much of an authoritarian. But in pro, I was the good cop. And because I had coached men, I had an understanding of how to forge relationships. And so I had a lot of great conversations, and that's what a lot of it was there. And the big takeaway for me at pro is that these guys still have confidence. They still have crisis of confidence. They still go through periods where the confidence is high and where it's low. I had the false assumption going in that wouldn't be the case. They're pros. They're pro. They've been through this. But, Corey Stillman, who now coaches the Guelph Storm, I had great conversations with Corey. He's an encyclopedia of hockey knowledge. So we would have great hockey chats all the time. Brian Allen was from my hometown, a veteran player. Brian McCabe, who'd been the captain of the Leafs, who's just, an ace of a human being, just a top shelf person. But it was a partnership. At pro, that was the biggest difference I seen. It's like, okay, we need to forge kind of like partnerships. And that's kind of the way we coach now at junior. And I think that was, times were changing then, but at pro, we all have to be on the same page. And the pro is more like just adjusting the camera. Things are a little bit out of focus. You need to adjust it. It's not as much teaching. You still have to teach at pro, but it's a much different approach than it is at junior.
When you have those 3 years on your resume, and then you come back to coaching junior players maybe from a tactical level, or maybe just from even an individual development level,
yeah.
What are maybe some of the new details, mechanics that you have at your disposal to know that, hey, like, guys, I've seen what's on the other side. You need this if you want to swim in that pond.
Well, I think the experiences, I look at the World Juniors, what they did with Brent and Pete, and then working with Pete in 3 years, and Dave, and I go back to it again, I've become a lot more clear, direct, concise in my messaging and my teaching. And I think that allows, and again, we spend a lot of time talking to teachers and how kids learn and all that. And I think before we tried to cloud them with too much. Now we try to simplify. We talked about identity, whether, it's 3 hits and concepts and systems and all that. So, I think it was just learning how to teach better in a more concise, direct way that players would understand it. And that came from watching good coaches. It also came from talking to great players that were open enough to willingness to share. And so I think the combination coming back of having, a clearer teaching method, but probably a better understanding of building relationships. Because now you're talking about, from the last time I was a head coach, I coached RMC. We talked about relationship with men. I coached under Dave. Got to observe him. Then I coached under Pete for 3 years. So now I'm 5 years removed. It's 5 years of different experiences. Looking back on it, that's why I say I should phone all the guys I coached prior to that time and apologize, because I'm like, you don't know what you don't know is the old expression. But I felt I come back after those combination of experiences, and you learn a little bit at each setting that you're in. So taking a little bit from RMC, a little bit from Dave Cameron, a lot from Pete DeBoer, and you meld it all together, and you're a completely different coach when you get that next opportunity.
Man, oh man. And I'm just like looking back at like the World Junior teams that you coached. It's God, time flies. You look at that roster and you see like assistant GMs in the NHL, you see, guys that are going to be head coaches pretty quick. It's it all comes full circle. When you touched on it earlier that, you've had the opportunity to build a program. Let's say you've had a chance to build a program over the long term in Charlottetown. If building a program was like going to IKEA and buying a new coffee table that you had to take home and assemble, what would be the first couple of steps that you would advise people or advise coaches to focus on?
I think building the identity. Number one, I think you have to understand who you are, and with that is some clarity. I don't think. Yeah, you have to adjust. It's like playing poker. You have to adjust your hand, but you still, if you're a poker player, you're either passive or you're aggressive, or you're a little bit risk adverse. But I think for us, we try to, again, we simplify the message. We want to be aggressive, tenacious, relentless. And we'll talk about 2 or 3 words. So that's where we start. We start the first day each year with our identity slide. And then we can't come back on it. So all of our systems, let's remember these 3 foundational pieces. Right. So in everything we do, these are 3 words. So then when we get into the concrete, whether it be forecheck or D zone, none of this matters a damn bit if we're not aggressive, tenacious, and resilient and all those things. So we keep talking, and then we'll try to define those in different ways and different times, but we'll keep coming back to that. It's kind of what you're saying with the Pete Carroll. Like, if you reaffirm the same messages over and over again, and the positive for us so early in the season, it might be some identity clips, whether it be effort on the forecheck, a shot block, a sacrifice, whatever it might be. But whatever your value system, and there's more than one way to skin a cat, is the old expression, right? Lots of different styles have had success. There doesn't have to be one. I think as a young coach, you have to embrace who you are, and you have to accept that. Like, I can't be Pete Carroll. I'm not going to be enemy sunshine roses every day. That's not who I am, right? Yet I've learned to soften the message. I can still be demanding. I can still have accountability, but I don't have to be demeaning. I don't have to do it hollering, right? But I can't change who I am. I have to embrace who I am, and I have to build that into it. And then I know what I fundamentally what I believe in wins hockey games. Another coach, another team might have a different one, and they'll have success. But for me, and vis-a-vis our program, these are what we believe in.
I heard you do an interview. I believe it would have been it was during the QMJHL playoffs last year. I think it was after you guys had been eliminated, and obviously Gardner McDougall, who's become a good friend of the coach's site, who's in Moncton, had a good season. And you made a comment about his ability to make in-game adjustments. And I believe that the reference specifically was to he broke up his top line in a game, and one of the players who moved up ends up scoring a critical goal, or maybe it was the winning goal. When you're in a game, and I think great analogy in the NHL, and this is what made me think about it when you talk about just you're just kind of adjusting the lens a little bit. And I think that so often that's what coaching is. It's not a 180. It's just that ability to tweak the dials. When you're in the middle of a game, what are maybe some of the areas that you're just mindful of, that if we are going to make a change, that these are some of the things that could be the difference between winning and losing?
Yeah, I think it's tinkering with the lines and not waiting to, I think with experience comes confidence, and with confidence comes the ability to make adjustments quickly, because you don't question yourself. You're not second guessing yourself. So I think a lot of times that might be, hey, we need a little bit more size on this line, or we need a little bit more speed. We just need a different look tonight. Some nights you don't have to, in particular in junior. And I think you have a little bit longer rope in junior than you do at pro, because as we talked about earlier in the interview, especially in the first half of the year, I think there's development that has to happen. But I think the ability to read who's on that night, who's off, is another key, and not waiting too long to make certain things. Not shortening the bench down, but maybe shuffling lines up. We'll look at a lot of, again, like a lot of coaches, I like to run in pairs, but sometimes just flip-flopping. Sometimes, depending on who we're playing, we'll just need a little bit more size on our top line. Another night, we might be able to go smaller, would have more speed, depending on what the structure is of the other team.
Jim, we'll get you out of here. I got two more.
Awesome.
One, you have the benefit of hindsight now. What is the impact or opportunity that coaches have?
We have an incredible opportunity to impact young lives, which is something that shouldn't be taken lightly. In particularly when you're coaching junior hockey. Junior hockey is not just about producing pros, and we touched on it earlier. It's about hopefully producing great people that walk out with the ability, teamwork, hard work, compete, sacrifice, and understanding that there's more to life than just this.
Love that. You mentioned you're a reader. We have that in common. What is the gift that you've recommended most to other coaches? Or what is the book that you have recommended most to other coaches?
That's a great question, because there's so many of them. The Cody Royal has some incredible insight. Cody's the guy that's kind of looked at it through a coach's eyes. It's the first book.
Have you seen his presentation on the coach's site?
I have. He's fabulous.
He's awesome. He's a good guy.
I would encourage any coach to read, because it was the most honest book I've said. We talked about it earlier about being open and honest. I read his one book and was like, okay, this is a coach, and he's not pulling any punches. It was insightful. That are quick, easy reads, but talk about on the button, man. I thought it was fabulous. So I've done a presentation. At the end of it, I'll put up a bunch of books, but I've never even met the guy, never talked to him, but I admire him from afar because of his ability to walk the line and get into areas that a lot of people don't want to get into, but that all of us are thinking and all of us have experienced.
Yeah, totally agree. No, I think he's onto something, and I've it was actually I have an executive coach I work with now, and it was all through just recognizing his presentation, just how important it is to have that sounding board. And I think,
Yeah.
to never, I think the quote was like, never trust a coach who's afraid to be coached. So there's something to be said for that. Jim, it has been a pleasure meeting you, and thanks so much for doing this. This has been awesome. Thanks for making time.
Likewise, thank you. I think what you're doing is great, and I think you touched on it earlier, the ability to share information. I think every coach is willing to do it, and I think we should take way more advantage of platforms like this and the opportunity to share.